Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Meet Your Diversity Goals with Talent Acquisition. My name is Mihir, Gandhi, and I'm the head of Marketplace Operations at Eightfold.ai. As a hiring manager for nearly 2 decades, sourcing, hiring, and retaining talent has been a central theme in my career. Managing at hypergrowth companies like Lyft, where I was the first general manager for their flagship region in Northern California, I've acutely felt the pain of hiring rapidly and hiring right. I'm thrilled at how Eightfold is addressing these challenges and so much more. Specifically today, we're diving deep into meeting diversity goals with talent acquisition. And we're joined by our esteemed guest, Daniel Doody. Daniel is the head of global talent at the AdRoll group, and we have some interesting and robust content to cover. By way of introduction, Daniel spent over 15 years in the recruitment world. He started in agencies supporting global growth. He opened Facebook's global office, the first engineering office outside of California. Later did the same at Twitter, managing global acquisition on the talent side. And 5 years ago, joined the AdRoll group, leading international recruiting and global talent acquisition. So with that, I'll kick it over to Daniel. Happy to have you, and thanks for spending the time with us.
Delighted to be here. Thanks very much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. I would love to maybe start a quick conversation around diversity. Can you help us understand a little bit more about diversity and why it's an important goal for talent acquisition?
Sure. Thank you, Mihir. So certainly from our point of view, for AdRoll Group, when we think about diversity, I think it's important just first and foremost to understand that we're a global organization. So diversity means different things in obviously different geographies. So we think about diversity in San Francisco and the Bay Area. We may have a focus on underrepresented minorities or women in engineering or women in tech, whereas in our European offices or international offices, that means something slightly different in Tokyo, Sydney, and Dublin. Why it is important, obviously, aside from the fact of the well-researched, well-documented benefits of having a diverse organization, I think it's because talent acquisition has fundamentally changed over the last number of years. It has now become a strategic imperative and a core pillar of a high-performing talent acquisition team. So it has to be woven into the fabric of absolutely everything that we do.
So as you think about, you said something interesting there as you talk about talent acquisition becoming a strategic pillar of an organization. This is a hot, trendy topic today. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it was more of a service-oriented transaction.
Cool.
Can you talk about that evolution a little bit? It seems like it's been through the duration of your career. How have you seen that evolve, and what have companies that have really been pushing the envelope been doing to ensure that talent acquisition is a source of strategic advantage?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm in a position to call out specific companies that have actually nailed this. Obviously, there are some that come to mind, and I may have worked in one or two of those. There is sometimes when people are talking about diversity, there's one or two that stand out. We were lucky enough to have Candice Gray here in the office, who did a fireside chat with our CEO, Toby Grominer, and there's some really, really interesting strategies that they've deployed that I think they are an organization that has been called out. In terms of the transition, in terms of how it has evolved, to your point, I think talent acquisition was a service team, and they were rec fillers, but now they have most of the successful organizations that are doing this right. There is a seat at the table. Talent acquisition are participating in that conversation. So as guardians of human capital and that team that is responsible for going out and raising awareness, identifying talent and engaging with that talent, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are thinking about this strategically and tactically. So we think about innovations in the tools that we use. We think about in terms of essentially the full funnel of the recruiting process, right? So if you think about writing a job description or an intake meeting where at that very early stage, you're starting to formulate that strategy with the hiring teams in terms of how we're going to go out and identify the talent. So it's in the tools that we use, it's in the innovative methods, it's in the training and education you work with internally, and then ultimately in the strategy that you deploy in order to fulfill that.
So you bring up something that I think a lot of folks on the line today have had experience with in terms of job descriptions historically, and I'll call myself out on this. It's been a copy and paste job with changing a few minor keywords.
Shame on you.
And I guess so guilty as charged. But I think as you look at job descriptions and how they evolve over time, I would love to hear a little bit about how you can use job descriptions to ensure that you're not only attracting a diverse set of candidates, but maybe more importantly, not turning off the diversity, turning off applicants of diversity through some keywords or the way that job descriptions are structured.
Wow, this is probably a webinar in itself in terms of that content, but I think, honestly speaking, I think it's about having that conversation and bringing it all back to what is the business problem that we're trying to solve for here. Removing the propensity that you outlined yourself, right, as a hiring manager, you fall into that trap of just copy and paste, or perhaps it's a high volume requisition where you just, wash, rinse, repeat, and you do the same thing over and over. But actually bringing it back down to, well, what is the business solution that we're trying to solve for here? And what are the outputs and the outcomes that are going to be represented of a successful hire? And I think if you take it from that perspective as well, you avoid maybe falling into those dangerous areas where bias can start creeping in.
So this helps, I think, bridge us into the next question or the next sort of pillar of questions around misconceptions for recruiting and diversity. So I'll leave this open-ended because I know you have some distinct thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's not a misconception, but it is extremely hard. I think that's the first thing to clarify. Going back to your previous question, what is that transformation being like, moving from transactional into strategic partnerships? I think around the misconception is that talent acquisition owns this, right? That you can create a job description and then let them go and execute on that strategy that has been fleshed out and created in order to solve for it. But there is no one silver bullet. Now, talent acquisition has to partner in all levels at all stages of that process. You have to be intentional. So in terms of, if you think about the various different tactics and tools that typically result in the hires or identifying the talent, it's referrals, it's sourcing, it's branding. So it is that sales and marketing funnel that we look to in terms of raising awareness, engaging the talent, and then bringing them into that process. And the talent acquisition has to be thinking about how to leverage internal employee resource groups. We have to be thinking about what are the tools that we're using, and what is the message that we are putting out there into the marketplace. And it's really, I think, the misconception is that it is just going out and trying to identify and bringing it in, but actually, in reality, it is a multitude of things that you have to really tie together in order to solve for this.
As you say that, what strikes me is the sentence "talent acquisition doesn't own it," and the way you described it, hiring managers have a deep impact on top of funnel recruiting. The marketing team has a big impact on attracting talent and engaging talent. ERGs do, and so all of a sudden, recruiting goes from being a function and a service to the organization to really a central strategic pillar. How can heads of TA and recruiting organizations begin to exert that influence on marketing, on hiring managers, on ERGs, and really pull them together to deliver a cohesive message around what it's actually like to work at the company?
So at AdRoll Group, we were lucky enough to have an executive team as well as a CEO who champion it. And I think that is becoming more prevalent. I wouldn't say that it's commonplace, but I think it certainly helps solve that problem. That allows you then as a TA leader to go out and engage with, from top down, from the executives all the way through the organization. So I think it's about creating a culture. And obviously culture, by its definition, is essentially those behaviors that are rewarded and identified as being rewarded. So making sure that the hiring managers understand that it is actually part of their remit to own this, and not just talent acquisition. Obviously, we have a huge part to play in helping those that are involved in education, learning, and development. So we talked about, removing bias in the process. Going back to your question, once you have that support and once that's part of the culture, it's really about making sure that you're reinforcing that through the various different parts of the process. And one of the things that we've done at AdRoll Group is make sure that that content and that education is becoming part of hiring manager training, interviewer training, so that each and every single touch point of that process. So if you're a candidate, whether you're reading marketing or branding material, or whether you're coming in for your first interview or part of a larger on-site, that there is a consistent experience in terms of unconscious bias or treatment as a candidate or as an individual going through that process. So I think a really core piece of it is education and making sure that people are aligned to understanding the importance of it.
Yeah, and as you say that, creating culture, there is a multimodal engagement with potential candidates, right, via Twitter, Instagram, social media, professional media, in like LinkedIn and so on and so forth. And it's not only the company-owned handles, but also the executives. And I think what we see is the talent picks up very quickly on discrepancies between what the company is saying, what individuals are saying across these multiple channels. As someone who is deeply engaged in that, how do you think about ensuring that there's a consistent message that's being sent across these channels?
It's really, really challenging because as an organization, AdRoll Group was founded in 2007, so we're over 10 years old. And obviously through that, you go through various different iterations and evolutions as a company. And unless you are super in control of that employer branding, right, which is a separate piece altogether, and quite often doesn't sit within talent acquisition, so it really requires you to have a strong partnership there. But it is constantly evolving in the same way as your organization is evolving. So it has to be real. It has to be authentic. If you are trying to present yourselves as something on Glassdoor or your career site or at an event, and then that experience that individuals have either during the process or after they onboard is disconnected or completely different, then you've got serious problems, right? So I guess the point that I'm making is that it's really got to be authentic and part of your actual values that you stand over.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, because it's sort of in the next question that topic we'll cover, best practices to recruit a diverse talent pool. And you talked a little bit about what you do today at the AdRoll Group, what you've seen to be successful in your time at Facebook and Twitter, and how that's changing.
Wow, okay, there's a lot in that. I think when we think about how to solve for this, there is no one silver bullet, right? So once you have that alignment and once you understand that it is a organizational-wide problem to solve, then you can start leveraging all the resources that you have at your disposal. So the things that we think about and how we solve for it, if, for example, at AdRoll Group, we know that 25% of our hires come through referrals, then we want to make sure that we are leveraging the underrepresented minorities that we have in the organization, and that's globally. So it's helping them understand that they have a part to play in that, organizing things like sourcing jams, working with various different partners, the likes of, we're going to Grace Hopper in a couple of weeks, so really excited. There's a really big cohort of engineers and people from the organization that are attending that. So it's being proactive about attending those events. We also organize a lot of hosted events. So if you think about that awareness and engagement piece, we found that one of the most influential things that we have done over the last number of months is making sure that we are participating in the local communities. So if we're solving it, for example, here in SF, in our headquarters, we're reaching out to various different organizations that our own employees are participating in and making sure that we are tapping into that. The danger with referrals is that you you generate the same type of profiles, right? So if you were a predominantly sales-oriented organization, which traditionally would have white males, and you're trying to tap into referrals, you're probably going to be creating that same cycle. So using things using things like Eightfold, using any of the innovations that are out there, whether it's machine learning or whether it's expanding social and professional networks, it's trying to maximize all of those channels, and then making sure that that experience, as we talked about, is a really authentic, genuine one.
Yes, and so as you we talked about this channel strategy, sort of multi-channel strategy between referrals, sourcing jams, local organizations, and as they relate to your overall sort of talent acquisition mix and talent retention mix. Do you see diversity sort of naturally channeling towards one of those channels, or do you see it sort of more broadly across all of those?
I'm not sure. Can you help me understand specifically what you mean by?
Yeah. So referrals can be as you pointed out, can be heavily biased against existing networks.
Sure.
Whereas sourcing jams, getting out in the community, can maybe have a broader exposure. That helps you with top of funnel. However, after that top of funnel, when you've gone through the phone screen, you're starting to get the hiring manager process, the actual interview loops, and I'll take the question maybe a little bit different direction. How do you help control for biases, or at least shine light on some of the unconscious bias that may preclude diverse talent from making it deeper into the interview cycle?
Yeah, it's a problem. It's one of the problems that we're trying to solve for at the moment, is understanding the diversity in the slate. So we try to surface those insights within the ATS that we use. And I think once we are able to do that, then we'll understand where at each stage of the funnel we are seeing those signals that will flag whether or not we have a problem, or whether we're overcompensating, for example. I think the tools that we use right now in order to solve for this is part of that education. Really what it boils down to is accountability, right? So it's holding each other accountable for ensuring that we do call each other out. So things like the debriefs, so having a conversation with the hiring panel after every single interview, and making sure that that is data-based and fact-based rather than opinion. And ironically, that's actually the benefit that you get from diverse teams, right? You have that cognitive friction, which indicates our ability as a group of individuals to avoid that kind of groupthink and make sure that we're incorporating all the various different perspectives. Does that?
It does. Let's talk about interview loops.
Okay.
It's so important.
Yeah.
Not only to ensure that you have diversity of thought in terms of the cross-functional partners that an employee or a candidate would be interfacing with, but then also cultural diversity across those interview loops. Can you talk about how those interview loops are set and what some best practices are?
Yeah, we think about it deeply at the beginning of the process. And so going back to that intake meeting, part of that intake in terms of looking at what we are trying to identify, what business problem we're trying to solve for, but also in terms of identifying the panels themselves. And we are very deliberate and intentional in making sure that those panels are diverse, not just from a functional perspective, but also from the nature of the individuals that are participating in that. So we try to solve for it at the very beginning, and then through the analysis of looking at scorecards and various things, we monitor that throughout. Part of the interview training as well is to make sure that we are continuing to diversify the pools of interviewers that are actually participating in our process. Because as we all know, if you're scaling fast and growing organizations, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call can appeal to, one of the big risks is obviously interviewer fatigue. And once you start fatiguing, then those unconscious bias things start to creep in, where you have confirmation bias or otherwise. So it's really about making sure that those panels are fresh, that they're calibrated, that they are trained, and then that we are calling each other out in terms of what the feedback looks like.
Got it. And so then as you do those interview loops, and as you think about the micro versus the macro And when I say micro, what I mean is any given manager manages between 1 and 10 people on average, right? But in aggregate, organizations are hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And in the aggregate, diversity matters increasingly in terms of what you report externally, et cetera, and there's a public accountability associated with it at the AdRoll group level, right? However, at the micro level of a department or division, let alone a singular manager, that same diversity doesn't necessarily translate. You don't have the breadth. And so how do you integrate into the training around diversity the need for micro building to macro?
Difficult problem to solve, right? Because you're working within the confines of those smaller teams.
And the managers are optimizing for their team and the performance of their team, their KPIs, their goals, which ladder up to the organizational goals, but diversity may or may not be one of them.
So I think then I think what you saw for then is standardization. So at AdRoll Group, we look to structured interviews. So each person, regardless of what their role is within that team, is going into that process, into that interview with a specific focus area. And that takes away a lot of the variables that can sometimes occur, whether it's opinion or personalities, and it becomes much more data-based. So you're going in there to fact-finding mission. And I think once you adhere to the rigor around that process, then I think you're on the right track in terms of making the right hiring decisions.
Got it. And when you use analytics to help understand how funnels are performing, meaning how diversity is progressing through the interview cycles, what is the feedback loop to the recruiting team on where they should be fishing for more talent, which pools they should be going to? Meaning, how do you use those analytics to help drive your channel strategy top of funnel?
Yeah, so this is where it gets tricky, I guess, because ultimately, and there's got to be a change in mindset from a recruiter, right? What we were talking about earlier, which is you're not here just to fill requisitions. It's about hiring the best talent. And so we think about that in terms of where are we going out and hunting for that talent. We have the branding and the marketing to raise awareness in different areas. So we try to solve for that at the very beginning of the process in terms of, okay, well, we know that these exist in various different competitors, but are we thinking about schools, colleges, or other organizations that would present a different pool of talent, which we know to be more diverse? So it's making sure that it's in there at the beginning. In terms of the analytics, we really just have to make sure that we're looking at that and understanding where those trends are, where we see flags, trying to course correct. And then it becomes quite tactical in terms of making sure that, again, we're having that conversation with the hiring manager to help understand what can the market provide us, like what is the reality, right? Because there is that too, but it's then being deliberate about expanding which and where we're going after that talent.
Yeah.
And that changes depending on the role or depending on the job.
Sure. So, with this increased focus and scrutiny on diversity and frankly in the talent space broadly, there's been an explosion of tools and analytics and capabilities for the talent teams and for organizations to help understand and dissect the work that they do. And no longer is it simply, scrolling through resumes and profiles and sending random emails. So can you talk a little bit about some of the toolkits that you've used and that you currently use? Obviously, Eightfold is one of them. But then also talk about them within the context of how goal setting has been changed or what goals look like for talent teams today, and how do you see that evolving over time with tools helping achieve those goals? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of exciting developments happening and innovative products that are coming onto the market, and Eightfold being one of those in terms of allowing us to leverage one of the largest assets that we have. It's a 10-year-old organization, been growing fast globally. We have an awful lot of data at our fingertips that even in 2-3 years ago, there wasn't the tools to really tap in and leverage that. And even there's a lot of ATSs that are probably industry standards that don't allow
talent acquisition teams to really interrogate in an intelligent way. So we see things like Eightfold now, machine learning and algorithms that are able to surface those profiles based off of successful applicants in the past. And I'm not saying people that have simply been hired, but also those that have traveled through the funnel and that have had indicators of success. Right, so if you think about Greenhouse or ATS and Eightfold in that partnership, we can understand based off of scorecards how successful someone's been in, what attributes maybe they've fallen down on, and of course that's an organic thing. So as we grow as an organization, the nature of the skill sets and positions that we're looking to fill have evolved. But we can't rely on recruiters to have intuition or to understand that. So we rely on tools like Eightfold to be able to surface those things. And we've seen some unbelievable returns with regard to its ability to, in a non-biased way, because it is a algorithm that is doing it, to surface those as, to use the sales and marketing term, like as a hot lead or as a high intent individual, that is a very high likelihood of matching some of those skills that we're looking to bring into the organization. There's other tools like Atypica that allow us to surface some of that data as well. Textio allows us to provide neutral tone and help us actually develop a more mastery around how to shape a job description in a way that's going to attract people as well.
So goals have probably changed. When you started at Facebook, it likely was along the lines of so many hires or a certain fill rate.
Yeah.
And that was your top line KPI or OKR. Can you talk about how diversity is starting to creep into some of your actual goals that you report up on?
Yeah. So at AdRoll Group, we have, about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a natural groundswell in terms of the transformation of the company globally, but also just an appetite from the executives and also shaped by the marketplace that diversity is becoming more and more important. So during those last couple of years, we've really thought very hard, and we've set some pretty aggressive goals around women in leadership and being one of those. And it's important to call out, right, just by solving women in leadership, you don't solve diversity. In fact, it's very dangerous area to get into. But women in leadership was one of those diversity goals. Women in technology and engineering is also another. And then making sure that we are also have a strategy around underrepresented minorities. And thankfully, we're in a position now where we are at 53% women in leadership. We're at 12% on underrepresented minorities, and women in tech we are. Well, it's probably going to be a big reveal on our career side soon enough around how we're doing on that. But I think as a recruitment function, yes, it of course has to play in and becomes one of those core pillars, whereas previously it was not. We don't set a hiring goal around assigning that to a recruiter. What we do is we give them accountability and ownership as part of that partnership with their hiring group to make sure that it is built into their strategy, whether that is where they're sourcing in terms of diverse talent pools, but also in terms of what are those things that we can leverage internally around ERGs and sourcing jobs and so forth.
So this is interesting, and it's actually a question that we've received from an audience member. And a quick note to the audience members: feel free, please, to engage. You probably have 5 or 10 minutes left of Daniel's time, and would love to ask him any questions you have. You can click the Q&A button at the bottom of the webinar. One of the questions that's been asked here is around global diversity, and so oftentimes. What the question says is, oftentimes articles that I've read deal with diversity from a very U.S.-centric point of view. How do you think about global diversity so it's not so U.S.-centric?
Yeah, great question. Really good. And it's something that is definitely part of how we are starting to change how we think about it. I think by our own admission, we probably were U.S.-centric. Thankfully, in my role as global head, I operate out of Dublin, so my perspective is entirely different to the Bay Areas, for example, where, for example, we look at it much more on a gender basis. So a lot of organizations, particularly in Europe, would be a sales and marketing function, right, where you have sales and account management predominantly male dominated. So for our Dublin office, for example, we think about it from a gender perspective, because actually by its nature, there are a lot of Europeans or multilingual people being hired into one site, and therefore you have a lot of different cultures already there. So you have that diversity built into it automatically. So it's about making sure there's a gender balance there. I think the other part of that question is really about the I and D&I, right? It's about inclusivity as well. And obviously that can take many different forms. It could be with regard to communication. So again, from a global perspective, one of the things that a lot of global organizations suffer from, or you hear that are challenging, is around global communication. Do people feel like they are included in decision making, or are they an afterthought in terms of the direction of product or localization and various different things? So when thinking about this, I think one of the pieces that AdRoll Group really does very well is making sure that we are being inclusive in those, and that requires, a lot of intentional proactivity in terms of making sure that we are including our global offices.
Got it. And another question from the audience, which dovetails quite nicely actually with this. What can TA teams and all people in a company do to encourage better hiring?
Talk about it more. Get out in front, right? I think.
So let's talk about that for a second, because when you say talk about it more, I think we still don't have the tools and the verbiage to know what to talk about or how to talk about it. Can you help us understand how the rank and file within an organization can talk about it more?
So it goes back to the culture and values, right? If you are intentional, if you have executive sponsorship, if it is truly something that your organization is trying to solve for, through whatever means those are, right? And we've touched on a few of them. Then I don't see where the challenge is. I think too many times, and seen it in too many organizations, where talent acquisition sits back and they become that transactional service team, or maybe it's siloed, right, where you've got a tech team or a sales team, or perhaps it's just by geographies or logistics. Part of solving for this is the internal brand and the internal messaging. So it's making sure that you are front and center, that you are at, that not just your executives are talking about it, or you're talking about it in hiring teams, but actually you're out there making sure that people, this is part of their responsibility. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And part of their responsibility, I think, as increasingly, people bring their personalities to work and bring their work to their personalities.
Hopefully.
Increasingly. One of the open questions from the audience was, any advice on how to find good local organizations to work with, or how to bring local organizations into the fold with the company?
Yes, ask the people that sit right beside you. And this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier on, around leveraging the ERGs, or leveraging the individuals, right, that this is to reinforce this is an organizational problem that we're trying to solve. So if you have people that you are hiring from local areas, and if you're not, well, then it's about going back out into those communities. So at AdRoll Group, we have a program called AdRoll Gives Back, whereby people are encouraged, and I think this is very much commonplace, where people are encouraged to go out and dedicate some of their own time to giving back to their communities. But more specifically, I think there are colleges, there are well recognized, for example, in the Bay Area, that would be predominantly more diverse than perhaps fishing in the same colleges as perhaps a larger population of the organization has come from. So I think it's about really getting in and leveraging the employees that you have, because to your point here, it is about bringing your authentic self to work. And in order to do that, obviously people have passions and things that they're interested in. So again, you could maybe start to surface some of those things at the beginning of the process, right? It's not just about what's on a resume. I think certainly when I'm interviewing individuals, one of the things I always try to do is tap into who they are, like what is most important to those, and what motivates them. And quite often, a lot of that thing will come from the things that they do in their spare time. So making sure that you're leveraging that when you actually bring people in and you have the employees that are there day in, day out, making sure that they can actually participate in solving that.
Yeah, so as you bring those employees in, and this next question, perhaps the last question we have time for, wraps back around to the interview loops and to the specific tactics associated with interview loops. And it has to do with the roles and responsibilities of different people on an interview loop. For specific positions, you will have technical or subject matter specific experts who are focused on X, Y, and Z. And then you'll have typically one person who is the culture fit interview or and so the question here is, how do you have the interview loop all test for culture in their own unique ways?
So at AdRoll, we do break it up into focus areas. We have stopped calling it culture fit because I think there's an inherent bias there. And one of the things that we definitely got right early on a few years ago as we were scaling, which by the way is probably one of the biggest risks as a growing company, right? That you lose touch of the values and the culture that perhaps speak to the founder or otherwise. But that identity is really important. Also understanding that it's nuanced, right? So as a global organization with offices everywhere, you're going to have obviously what it means to be an AdRoll group or an Eightfold. You've probably got this sense. We have some spirit animals that we try to identify with in terms of working hard, doing right by the customers and so forth. So what we try to do is make sure that first of all we understand it. Like what does culture or value, like a values interview as we call it internally, what are we looking for? Like what is a values fit? So we think about, well, for example, speaking about diversity, we want people who are passionate about giving back to their communities or passionate about things outside of work. So it's a difficult one to solve because if you try to identify that values or culture fit in each of the stages, very quickly you're going to run out of time or you'll be getting the same signal. And interviewing is tough enough, right? So if you're running a structured process, it's important to obviously have a mandate and an objective for each of the individuals. And yes, I think ultimately try to identify, but I'm not sure whether I'm answering the question, but here certainly what we try to do is make sure that at least one of the panelists is focused on values. Do they, are they hardworking? What is it that they stand for? And then probably the hiring manager as well to participate in that particular conversation. But doing it across the board for all panelists is challenging. And quite frequently during the debriefs, those that do try to head that direction are typically not getting the right signal in their core objective part of the interview.
Yeah, and I'll add one of my questions on here. It was going to be around the debrief. I've been in debriefs personally where the recruiter has taken a back seat and let the room sort of or let the interview loop fill the room. I've been in rooms where the recruiter has been front and central quarterbacking the dialogue and bringing people back on track when people start to meander maybe against or away from the structures.
There's a big difference.
There's a big difference there. So can you talk about recruiting recruiters who can quarterback the process? Because that seems like a central sort of strategic advantage to have a recruiter that can help do that. What do you look for in recruiters that can help bring diversity forward like that?
So honestly, that is not something that I think recruiters own. I think that's part of that accountability piece that we talked about. So when we are rolling out interviewer training, we're very, very careful to make sure that, just as you referred to earlier, that people are bringing their authentic selves. It's really important for interviewers to feel empowered to provide that. You're giving them the tools. They're investing the time. They are forming their opinion based off of questions, hopefully behavioral, statistically based questions that allow them to get a strong signal. So quite often I would encourage recruiters actually to get out of the way. Obviously hold people accountable. So for example, one of the things that we look out for is people coming to the debrief without their feedback submitted or without a scorecard. Luckily we have almost 100% scorecard completion before debrief start. So what does that do? It avoids that groupthink. It avoids the fact that if you have an overbearing recruiter, or to your point, a wallflower that's not maybe making sure that that session is being facilitated, people will defer to quite often the most senior person in that room, right? So, but if you have a calibrated, well-trained and accountable interview panel that are going to call out biases, but they're going to call out people who aren't holding up their part of the process, then I think you get a wonderful synergy where actually you've got almost like a self-policing system. And I've been in debriefs where the recruiter just lets that flow. But I think it's important, the rigor around the process is really important. And one of the reasons why I think we have been very successful in this area is because there is that calibration and people understand that they can't show up without their due diligence and without populating those scorecards.
Got it, Daniel. Well, I think we've probably borne a couple of additional follow-up webinars out of this dialogue. I know we're running short on time here. I want to thank you for your time and your insights. The AdRoll Group, for those on the webinar, to learn more about the AdRoll Group, please check them out at adrollgroup.com, and about Eightfold talent acquisition and talent management services, eightfold.ai. Daniel, this has been fantastic. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you in the coming months and years.
Can we do more of these webinars? This is great.
And I would love to do more of these webinars. Maybe next time we'll grab a drink and do it then too.
Happy to.
All right.
Thank you very much, Mihir.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thank you for your attendance on the webinar. We'll be recording this and sharing it broadly with the groups. Thank you so much.